Hi, it's Wednesday, and that means it's time for another video of Widower Wednesday. I'm Abel Keogh, author of the book Dating a Widower, and today we're going to discuss prolonged grief, mental illness, and how long it should take to grieve. The idea for this video comes from a New York Times article, and the headline, here it is right here, is How Long Should It Take to Grieve? Psychiatry has come up with an answer. And I will link to this New York Times article in the summary or the description of the video below if you want to follow along. But basically, what's happened is that they've defined a new disorder, and that's their term, called prolonged grief, and they're basically saying that if you haven't returned to your normal activities after a year, something's wrong with you. They've kind of defined it as a mental illness. I got issues with it. I agree and disagree with bits and pieces of what they've done here. So I'm going to read from the article and share my thoughts, but that's kind of where this video is going today. So from the article, this is how it starts out. It says, after more than a decade of argument, Psychiatry's most powerful body in the United States added a new disorder this week to its diagnostic manual: prolonged grief. The decision marks an end to a long debate within the field of mental health, steering researchers and clinicians to view intense grief as a target for medical treatment at a moment when many Americans are overwhelmed by loss. The new diagnosis, prolonged grief disorder, was designed to apply to a narrow slice of the population who are incapacitated, pining, and ruminating a year after loss and unable to return to previous activities. Okay, so basically, you've experienced a loss, and if you're not returned to normal activities after a year, there's something wrong with you, is what they're saying. So my thoughts on this part, I have mixed thoughts on this, and this comes, by the way, from my own experience, and again from talking to widowers and widows for 15 years. And I know there's different kinds of loss. Okay, I know some of you are thinking, well, you're talking about spousal loss. Yeah, I know that. And for those who don't know my history, I did lose a wife and a child within 9 days of each other, an infant daughter. So I'm kind of speaking from two kinds of losses here. But again, most of the people I've talked to are widows and widowers, and so I know there's different kinds of losses and things like that. But I think what I've seen over and over again from people who have experienced loss, it kind of falls into this typical pattern that I'm going to describe. And again, this isn't just my own experience. This is talking to people for over 15 years about this. So anyway, so this is my thought about loss: is that and grief and moving forward, is that life slowly returns to normal. For most people. And again, we're talking 95% of the people, life slowly returns to normal. It's not something that just happens overnight or you flip a switch. But I don't know if I like this idea of after a year, that there's something wrong with you. I think for most people, after a year, from my experience, and again, talking to people all these years, I think that life is about 60%, 70% back to normal after a year for most people. They're going back to work, they're being productive at work, they've kind of adjusted to being a single dad or a single mom if they have kids living at home. Life's not perfect, but they've kind of made the adjustments where, they're kind of out of the, my life is over kind of mode and more into they've kind of, they're at the very least they're treading water, or at least they're kind of moving forward with their life. And that's kind of where I see people at a year. And again, in my own experience, I was seriously dating again after a year, and I was getting ready to get engaged and stuff like that. And I know that was, that's probably faster than most people, but I would agree that I wasn't at 100% at a year. I was maybe at 85, 90% after a year. So again, they're talking about people who, can't move forward after a year. And again, my experience is that life slowly returns to normal, and most people, it takes about 2 years. Again, I'm talking loss of the spouse here. It takes about 2 years, I think, to people to get basically to 99%. I don't know if you're ever at 100%, but I think you can heal from grief. I think you can move forward, and you can be happy again. But again, my experience is that usually about 2 years after, people have pretty much put their life back together the best that they can. And I understand that's different for everybody. I'm not necessarily prescribing something here, but most people have pretty much moved on at about 2 years. Now, I do agree that there is a small subset of the population that I've seen, that they're calling prolonged grief, which I have seen, whether it be in friends and family, or whether it be, in clients or clients that are dating somebody. I have seen, where it's been like widowers where it's been 5, 8, 10 years after the loss of their spouse, they're dating someone, and her clothes are still in the closet. The house is still unchanged after all this time. They're just kind of treading water. So I do think that there is a small subset of the population who does suffer from prolonged grief. I don't necessarily like the idea of defining that term as a year, but I've seen it again in my own life, and then in just people that I've talked to over the last 15 years, that there are people who are stuck. Let's just say they lose a spouse, they lose someone they loved, and life just kind of is stuck, and life really hasn't changed, and they're doing things that aren't helpful to them. So I do agree that there's prolonged grief, but again, I always say that what you want to look for is progress, not progression. I know people talk about, there's a grief journey and everybody's journey is different, and I agree with that. But I always tell, like women who are dating widowers, for example, that what you want to look for is progress, not perfection. That, is he better? Is he handling things better today than he was yesterday and last week and last month and last year and things like that? Is, people can slowly climb out, and most people want to. They just, it's kind of like, they eventually go up. It's not like a rocket ship, but it's up, and maybe a bad day or two, and then it's up again, and another bad day or two, and eventually, again, they reach a point where they've started a new chapter, and I think most people have healed from it. What I don't like comes into this article is that, and this is what I have, is I'm not a fan of medication for grief, and that's kind of what this diagnosis opens up to. Is it says in the article, it will most likely open a stream of funding for research into treatments. I'm going to slaughter this, but it's noxiltrine, a drug used to help treat addiction, is currently in clinical trials as a form of grief therapy, and set off a competition for approval of medicines by the Food and Drug Administration. I'm not. It's just I'm not a fan of necessarily medication for grief. I do believe that grief is a lot in your head and in your mind, and I think that I think there are ways to treat it, where people can shift their mental focus and then do what it takes. Maybe to clean out the closet, clean out a room. I don't know, redecorate the house, move, or whatever it is that they need to do to move forward. But I think it's more of a mental thing. I don't like the idea of necessarily, hey, take this pill and you'll stop grieving. In my mind, grief is way more complicated than just taking a pill. Anyway, my thoughts on that. Now to continue with this article, it says, throughout that time, critics of the idea, so critics of this prolonged grief disorder, have argued vigorously against categorizing grief as a mental disorder, saying that the designation risks pathologizing a fundamental aspect of human experience. They warn there will be false positives, grieving people told by doctors that they have a mental illness when they're actually emerging slowly but naturally from their loss. And I actually kind of take that side. That's why I'm kind of hesitant about the year mark. Is like, well, where are you? To me, it would be looking at your life. Well, where are you? At the year mark compared to where you were, the day or the week after loss. How much progress have you made? And again, people move at their own pace. But I think it's also fair to say that there's some people that don't want to get over grief and they want to be sad all the time. I know some of you are freaking out at that. I'll explain and give you some examples in a minute. But yes, I don't think necessarily grief itself isn't a mental disorder, but I do think on the prolonged grief, yes, people need some help. I think that there are people out there that need some treatment. I'm not necessarily a fan of drugs. There's if you go through the article, there's actually a doctor in there that has come up with some kind of, I don't know, 15, 16 week treatment plan that, that can kick people in the butt and kind of move them forward. Again, I'm not necessarily endorsing what she does. Again, I do think that there are a subset of people that do suffer from prolonged grief and probably do need some very specific help and treatment. I just don't think that drugs is necessarily the way to do it. And again, I don't like the idea of a year. I think, again, maybe 2 years, but again, it's really looking for that progress. Are you better today than you were yesterday? Are you better today than you were last month, last year? And if people are making that slow and steady climb out of grief, I think they're fine. It's when people are flatlining or going down where I think that is the problem. So again, I know some of you are saying, well, you said some people don't like to grieve, they don't want to stop grieving. Back it up. Well, it was interesting. I went to the comment section of this article, and I'm just going to read you again comments from this is straight. I didn't write these. This is what people are writing, And I think it kind of, sadly, it backs up the idea that people don't want to get over grief. One lady says, over 8 years ago, I lost my son, an only child. He was 19 years old. It took me 4 years to get back to life, and I will never fully recover or get over it. And again, I've lost a child. I get it. She says it took 4 years to get back to life. Okay, she got back to life. It took 4 years. That's fine. But she said, I will never fully recover or get over it. And I think it's like, no, you can fully recover and get over it. It doesn't mean you stop missing that person, but I think you can reach a point in your life, and I'm not, again, it's, the timeline's different for everybody, but I think you can fully reach a point in your life where you're not grieving that person anymore. And, whether you believe you'll see him again or whatever your belief system is, I think you can get over grief. And again, I'm not prescribing a timeline here, but again, it's that mindset of I'm never going to fully recover or get over it. If you think that, if that's your mindset, I agree, you're not going to fully recover or get over it. I know that again, going back to my own experience, I can understand where she's coming from, because I was like, how am I going to get over this? But you can. It takes a lot of work. I think you can move forward and you can redefine your life and you can be happy again. Doesn't mean you stop missing people, but I don't think you're actively grieving anymore. And I guess that's maybe we're mincing over words here, but I think there's a difference between missing someone and actively grieving them. And yeah, I miss my late wife. I miss my daughter. Am I actively grieving them? Am I tearing up over them? No, I have a new life and I look forward to seeing them one day, but I'm not actively grieving them. Another comment is written here. It says, 18 months into losing my wife of 36 years to cancer, I don't see how grief gets any better. The myth of closure. Again, where is your mind? Again, I think if he's thinking like grief's not going to get any better, he's right. Grief's not going to get any better, because I don't know if he intentionally doesn't want it to get better, or again, I don't have insight into this situation. But again, it's, do you want to get better or not? It's like a lot of things. If you want to get better, if you want to improve, you'll improve. And I don't know what healing looks like for these people, but if you think you're not going to get better and you think you're always going to be grieving, you are always going to be grieving. Another comment, it says, the only person to decide if grief is prolonged should be the griever. Again, it's just that excuse. I mean, I do agree that grief is different for everybody, and some are shorter journeys than longer journeys, but at the same time, if you've lost a spouse, for example, and it's been 5 years and her clothes are still in the closet and nothing in the house has changed, and you're not really repairing the house, for example, or there's still pictures of her on the wall, what can we do here to kind of move forward and reach a point where where you can be happy most of the time again. Again, I'm not a fan of the idea that this is something that grief lasts forever, because it doesn't. I do like, there is a story at the end of the article I want to share. I think this kind of sums up the experience of lots of people, at least that I've talked to. It kind of rings true, again, not only in my own experience, but the experience of others that I've talked to over the last 15 years. This is at the very end of the article. It says, to set a year as a point of diagnosis is arbitrary and kind of cruel, said Anne Hood, whose memoir, Comfort: A Journey Through Grief, describes the death of her 5-year-old daughter from a strep infection. Her own experience, she said, was full of peaks and valleys and surprises. Okay, I think that's right. Peaks, valleys, surprises, but again, making that a steady progress. The first time Mrs. Hood walked into her daughter's Grace's room after her death, she saw a pair of ballet tights lying in a tangle on the floor where the little girl had dropped them. She screamed. Not the kind of scream that comes from fright, she later wrote, but the kind that comes from the deepest grief imaginable. She slammed the door, left the room untouched, and eventually turned off the heat to that part of the house. At the 1-year mark, a well-meaning friend told her it was time to clean out the room. Nothing worse than a shrine, he told her, but she ignored him. So I'm going to stop here. This is my own commentary before I finish the article. Her friend is right. There is nothing worse than a shrine. I don't know if the year mark was actually the, again, right place to actually do that, but I think, right intentions. I don't know if the timing was right, but the intentions, I think, are right. of her friend. But again, it's a well-meaning friend trying to help. Hey, you can't leave the room there forever. She ignored him. But then it goes on like this. It says, then one morning, 3 years after Grace's death, Mrs. Hood woke up and returned to the room. She sorted through her daughter's clothes, she sorted her daughter's clothes and toys into plastic bins, emptied the bureau and closet that lined up her little shoes at the top of the stairs. To this day, she's not sure how she got from one point to the other. All of a sudden, you look up, she said, and a few years have gone by, and you're back in the world. Okay? That kind of rings true. And I know that maybe she doesn't realize, my guess, and again, I don't know Miss Hood here, so I don't necessarily mean to speak from her, but again, my own experience, and again, talking again with widows and widowers, is that there's probably a lot of, she reached this point. It took her 3 years, but she was finally able to go into the room, sort out the things, clean out the room. Very healthy thing to do. Good. I'm glad she was able to do it. It took her 3 years. I don't see a problem with that. But my guess is she was actually probably, what she probably maybe doesn't realize is she was doing a lot of work. And maybe it didn't seem like it. She talked about the peaks and valleys, because again, grief is a lot of work, and if you want to get through it, it takes a lot of effort and a lot of work. It's not something that just happens. But my guess is that Miss Hood there was actually doing a lot of work. Maybe she wasn't conscious of it, but she was probably doing her best to kind of move forward, and then finally reached a point, that magical point, where she could go into the room and clean it out. And again, I'm sure she'll always miss her daughter. I'm sure she'll have tender moments where she thinks about her daughter. But she reached a point, which is healthy in my opinion, where she could actually go in and clean out the room and do that. And I think that's where, when it comes to loss, when you're, again, loss of a spouse, loss of a child, different kinds of loss here, I think we all have to reach a point where you can go in and clean out that room, whether it's an actual literal room you're cleaning out, or if it's, something in your mind, or whatever that is, you reach that point. And it took her 3 years to reach it. Again, my guess is, if it tracks with what she says and what I've seen, is that again, it's grief, it's peaks and valleys, but generally it's progress up, and then eventually you reach a point where things are just better, and you can kind of rejoin the world. And I'm glad she was able to reach that point. I'm glad, it took her 3 years. She's better than me, by the way. When I lost, again, I didn't have like a room or anything, to clean out when it came to my daughter Hope. But it took me longer than 3 years. I'll just tell. People are asking, well, how long did it take you, Abel? It took longer than 3 years. It took a while before I could reach that point where I could really, kind of think about Hope and do things like that. Clean out that mental room, I guess you could say, where I could reach a point where I wouldn't tear up when I thought about her and things like that. So it happens. Again, I think I tracked better on losing a spouse. I think I was, I tracked faster on that. The death of a daughter was a lot harder. But again, anyway, interesting article. I encourage you to read it. I encourage you to leave comments. Go ahead and leave comments. If you have your own experiences that you'd like to share, feel free to leave them down in the comments or send me an email. I'm happy to share them with viewers. So again, prolonged grief. How long should it take to grieve? I don't know if there's necessarily a time frame, but I think that most people will pull out of it within a couple of years if they put the effort and work into it. And again, there's a small subset of people that I think probably do need some professional help. But again, I'm not a fan of the year mark that life should be back to normal. I think it should be, a big part of it should be back to normal, but interesting things is I think we're going to be seeing the consequences of this in the months and years to come, and as they show up in news stories and things like that, I will keep you all posted. I'm Abel Keogh, author of the book Dating a Widower, and I will see you all next Wednesday.